March 15, 1944, 20,000 feet over the Solomon Islands. Lieutenant Walter pulled his A6M0 into a gentle banking turn, scanning the sky through sections. 8 seconds per quadrant, exactly as the manual required. High right, high center, high left, level right, level center, level left, low right, low center, low left. Nothing. Blue sky, scattered cumulus at 15,000 feet, visibility unlimited. His wingman flew 200 meters off his right wing, also scanning. The R. Crackled, American formation detected, single fighter. Bearing 280 degrees, range 4 kilometers, altitude equal. Walter's pulse quickened. 1 American, 2 zeros, good odds. He pushed the throttle forward. The engine responded immediately, matched his speed. They closed the distance. 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers. Walter's eyes swept the empty sky. Training had drilled the pattern into his brain. Scan, identify, engage. He scanned, nothing. 1 kilometer. Still nothing. His voice came through the radio, steady and professional. I don't see him. Walter didn't either, but radar didn't lie. American fighter right here, right now. Then zero exploded. Not slowly, not with smoke trailing from an engine. The entire aircraft disintegrated in a single violent moment. Wings separated from fuselage. Cockpit erupted. His body tumbled through the debris cloud, his parachute never opening. Walter yanked his stick hard left, banking away. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scanned desperately. Where did the attack come from? He'd been looking. 8-second intervals, perfect visibility. He should have seen the muzzle flash, should have seen the aircraft, should have seen something. Nothing. He dove for the cloud layer, pushing his zero to maximum speed. The airframe shuddered. His altimeter unwound. 18,000 feet, 16,000, 14,000. He punched into the clouds and pulled back on the stick, banking hard right, then left, breaking any possible tracking solution. When he emerged at 12,000 feet, the sky above him was empty. He climbed back through the clouds, circling cautiously. His debris field drifted down toward the ocean. Oil slick, fabric, metal fragments, no enemy aircraft visible. Walter flew home alone. In the debriefing room at Rabaul, he filled out the combat loss report. Cause of death, unknown. Enemy type, unknown. Attack direction, unknown. He wrote perfect visibility 3 times in his statement. The intelligence officer read it, frowned, and filed it with 17 other reports that said exactly the same thing. The pattern had started 3 weeks earlier. February 21st. 6 Zeros on patrol over Bougainville. They detected a lone American fighter at 22,000 feet. 3 pilots saw nothing. The 4th pilot died when his aircraft exploded mid-scan. No one witnessed the attack. The remaining 5 scattered and returned to base. February 27th. 4 Zeros escorting bombers. American fighter reported by ground observers. The Zeros climbed to intercept. Lead pilot radioed, scanning. Nothing visible. His transmission ended mid-word. His Zero fell in 2 pieces. The bomber formation aborted. Ground observers insisted they'd seen both aircraft clearly, Japanese fighter and American fighter, close enough to fire. The Japanese pilots saw only sky. March 3rd. Experienced ace lieutenant, 19 confirmed kills, led 2 wingmen on offensive sweep. Radar detected American fighter. Followed doctrine perfectly. 8-second scans. Altitude advantage. Sun position favorable. He radioed his wingmen, preparing to engage. 5 seconds later, his Zero exploded. His wingmen saw the fireball. Neither saw what caused it. Both pilots returned to base and requested immediate transfer to different squadrons. March 8th. Solo patrol. Pilot named 11 combat missions, solid record. He reported visual contact with American fighter. He reported closing to firing range. He reported, quote, I have a shot, end of transmission. His Zero crashed into the ocean 12 kilometers from base. Recovery team found the wreckage. Bullet holes stitched across the fuselage from nose to tail. Concentrated pattern, professional marksmanship. The recovery chief noted in his report, bullets came from ahead and slightly above. Pilot should have seen attacker. By March 15th, when Walter lost, Japanese intelligence had documented 23 similar incidents. Same pattern. Same impossibility. American fighter detected, Japanese pilots scanned, perfect visibility, no visual contact, Japanese aircraft exploded, American aircraft vanished. The losses were surgical, 1 aircraft destroyed per encounter, never 2, never 0, always exactly 1. The American pilot, whoever he was, fired once, killed once, and disappeared. No prolonged engagement, no dogfight. No second pass, single burst, target destroyed, gone. Japanese pilots began refusing patrol assignments over the Solomons. Ground crews noticed trembling hands during pre-flight inspections. Combat veterans with 20 missions requested transfers to China or Burma, anywhere except the South Pacific. One pilot told his squadron commander, "I can't fight what I can't see." The squadron commander understood. He'd read the reports. He'd attended the funerals. He'd looked at the recovery photos showing debris fields with no visible attacker. He approved the transfer requests. Morale was collapsing faster than the kill rate. Japanese naval intelligence formed a special analysis team. 4 officers, complete access to all combat records, pilot statements, and recovered wreckage. Their mission: explain the phenomenon. Their deadline: 2 weeks. They started with the obvious theory. American pilots were simply better trained than their Japanese counterparts. Superior gunnery skills, superior tactical awareness, superior situational judgment. The Americans could spot Japanese fighters before being spotted. They could fire accurately from longer range. They could execute perfect ambush geometry. The theory made sense. American training programs had improved dramatically since 1942. Flight time increased, gunnery standards raised, tactical doctrine refined. Maybe the Americans had produced a generation of super pilots who could kill efficiently, because they'd mastered fundamentals that Japanese pilots, rushed through abbreviated training, had never learned. The intelligence team pulled combat records. They compared pilot experience levels between losses. The data showed no correlation. Veteran Japanese pilots with 30 combat missions died at the same rate as rookies with 3 missions. Aces with confirmed kills died as easily as novices. Lieutenant, 19 kills, 2 years combat experience, considered one of the best pilots in the theater, died exactly like, who'd graduated flight school 6 weeks earlier. If American pilot skill was the explanation, experienced Japanese pilots should have survived longer. They should have seen the attacks coming. They should have evaded. They didn't. The intelligence team tested the theory directly. They assigned the 5 best pilots in the theater to a special intercept mission. These weren't average pilots. These were men with 20-plus kills. Men who'd survived Midway, Guadalcanal, Coral Sea. Men whose names appeared in commendations and whose faces appeared in recruiting posters. March 19th, the 5 aces launched together. Radar detected American fighter, perfect conditions, unlimited visibility, 5 sets of expert eyes scanning 8-second intervals. 3 of the 5 returned to base. The 2 who died never saw their killer. The pilot skill theory was completely wrong. The intelligence team reconvened. Pilot skill eliminated. Something else was happening. They examined the second theory, equipment failure. Japanese aircraft or detection systems were malfunctioning. The Americans weren't invisible. Japanese pilots simply couldn't see them because their equipment was broken. The theory had evidence. Zeros used basic optical gun sights. No radar, no targeting computers, just a ring-end bead sight mounted on the cowling. If the sight alignment was off by even 2 degrees, pilots would look in the wrong direction. If canopy glass developed distortions from temperature stress or battle damage, visual clarity degraded. If pilots' oxygen systems delivered insufficient flow above 18,000 feet, cognitive function declined and visual acuity suffered. Maybe the problem wasn't American superiority. Maybe Japanese equipment was failing systematically, creating blind spots that Americans exploited. The intelligence team ordered comprehensive equipment inspections, every zero in the theater, every gun sight calibrated, every canopy inspected for optical distortion, every oxygen system pressure tested. Mechanics worked 72 hours straight. They found issues. Misaligned sights on 4 aircraft, cracked canopy on 1, low oxygen pressure on 3 systems. They fixed everything. They certified every aircraft combat-ready with perfect equipment. March 23rd, 4 Zeros launched. All equipment within tolerances 30 minutes before takeoff, fresh canopies, calibrated sights, full oxygen pressure. The best-maintained aircraft in the squadron. Radar detected American fighter. The 4 Zeros climbed to intercept. Lead pilot confirmed equipment status, sight aligned, canopy clear, breathing normal. 2 minutes later, his Zero exploded. The remaining 3 pilots reported perfect equipment function throughout the engagement. None saw the American. The squadron maintenance officer reviewed the pre-flight logs. Everything had been perfect. Everything remained perfect. 1 pilot still died. The intelligence team tried a different approach. Maybe detection systems were the problem. Japanese radar was crude compared to Allied systems. Surface search radar designed for ships adapted poorly for aircraft tracking. Range accuracy questionable. Altitude data unreliable. Maybe radar showed American fighters that weren't actually there. Pilots chased ghosts while real threats approached from different vectors. They tested this. March 26th, 2 Zeros on patrol, no radar guidance. Visual search only, clear weather. Morning sun behind them, optimal lighting. Pilots instructed to trust their eyes, ignore radar reports. Both returned to base. They'd seen nothing, engaged nothing, lost nothing. The intelligence officer thought he'd found something. Without radar guidance, pilots avoided the invisible American. Maybe radar was leading pilots into traps. March 27, 4 Zeros, same test, visual search only, no radar. Ground observers watched through binoculars. They saw both formations clearly. 4 Zeros in formation. 1 American fighter approaching from the east, altitude equal, distance closing. The Zeros flew straight ahead. The American closed to 500 meters, 400 meters, 300 meters. 1 Zero exploded. Ground observers radioed frantically. American fighter directly behind you, break right. The surviving Zero pilots responded immediately. They broke formation. They scanned desperately in the direction ground observers indicated. They saw nothing. The American had already vanished. Equipment theory was wrong. Perfect sights, clear canopies, full oxygen, no radar to mislead them. Ground observers confirming visual contact. Japanese pilots still saw nothing, still died. The intelligence team expanded their investigation. They examined American aircraft types. Maybe the Americans had developed a new fighter, something small, something painted in camouflage that matched sky color perfectly, something engineered specifically for invisibility. They reviewed recovered American aircraft. 3 P-38 Lightnings captured or downed in previous months. Intelligence officers measured the airframes. Large aircraft, twin booms. Distinctive silhouette, wingspan 52 feet. Length 37 feet, not small, not subtle, impossible to miss at close range. They examined the camouflage paint. Standard olive drab and neutral gray. Same colors used on every American fighter. Nothing special, nothing revolutionary. Paint samples analyzed in Tokyo laboratories showed no unusual properties. No light absorption technology. No optical tricks, just paint. They tested pilot vision. Maybe prolonged combat stress had degraded Japanese pilots' eyesight. They examined 20 pilots, visual acuity tests, color perception tests, depth perception tests, night vision tests. Every pilot tested within normal parameters. Several tested above average. Their eyes worked perfectly. They considered psychological factors. Combat fatigue, fear, panic. Maybe pilots saw the American fighter but fear paralyzed their response. Maybe their minds refused to process the threat. Maybe they looked directly at the enemy but psychological trauma prevented recognition. The squadron doctor interviewed survivors. He used standard psychiatric evaluation protocols. He looked for signs of dissociation, denial, suppression. He found none. The pilots weren't blocking traumatic memories. They genuinely hadn't seen anything. Their confusion was authentic. Their fear came from the mystery, not from repressed knowledge. By April 1st, the intelligence team had tested every theory they could construct. Pilot skill, wrong. Veterans died like novices. Equipment failure, wrong. Perfect aircraft, perfect systems, pilots still died. Detection systems, wrong. Visual search without radar changed nothing. New aircraft type, wrong. P-38 was large and distinctive. Camouflage technology, wrong. Standard paint, nothing special. Vision degradation, wrong. Pilot's eyes tested normal. Psychological trauma, wrong. Pilots genuinely saw nothing. The team submitted their report to Naval Headquarters. Conclusion, unknown. Recommendation, avoid engagement with American fighters over the Solomons until phenomenon explained. Naval Headquarters rejected the recommendation. The Solomons were strategically critical. Avoiding engagement meant surrendering air superiority. Unacceptable. April 3rd. 6 Zeros launched on mandatory patrol. All pilots knew the statistics. 23 dead in 6 weeks. No explanation, no defense, no counter-tactic. They flew anyway. Orders were orders. Radar detected American fighter. The formation leader made his decision. He ordered his pilots to engage exactly as doctrine. 8-second scans. Altitude advantage. Proper spacing. Perfect execution. Maybe doctrine would save them. Maybe following every rule would reveal what they'd been missing. 5 Zeros returned to base. The 6th pilot disappeared at 19,500 feet. Perfect visibility. Perfect doctrine. He never transmitted what killed him. The 5 survivors never saw what killed him either. Nobody understood. Not Japanese intelligence. Not the pilots flying the missions. Not the ground observers watching through binoculars. Not the mechanics maintaining perfect aircraft. Not the doctors examining healthy eyes. Not the analysts reviewing radar data. Something impossible was happening in the sky over the Solomons. Japanese pilots were dying while looking directly at the space where their killer should be. Perfect conditions. Perfect doctrine. Perfect equipment. Perfect training. All of it useless. The answer was in physics. Basic optical physics that every pilot learned in ground school. Nobody thought to look there. The truth was so simple that everyone missed it. Even the Americans who were using it didn't fully understand why it worked. The problem was contrast. Not camouflage, not invisibility, not new technology. Simple visual contrast at altitude. Human eyes don't see objects. They see differences. Light versus dark, shape versus background, movement versus stillness. The brain processes these differences and constructs what we call vision, but the brain can only process differences that actually exist. When an object matches its background precisely, when contrast disappears, the object effectively vanishes, not because it's invisible, but because there's nothing for the eye to detect. At 20,000 feet, the sky isn't blue. It's a specific shade of gray blue that changes with sun angle, atmospheric haze, and altitude. Aircraft flying at that altitude appear as dark silhouettes against this background, unless they're painted to match it exactly. The American pilot was flying a P-38 Lightning painted in a specific gray that matched the sky at high altitude, not the standard olive drab and neutral gray used on most American fighters. A custom color, experimental, applied at depot level before deployment. The paint absorbed certain wavelengths of light and reflected others in proportions that matched atmospheric scattering at 18,000 to 22,000 feet. When the P-38 flew at those altitudes, with the sun at specific angles, the aircraft's paint matched the sky so precisely that human eyes couldn't detect the contrast needed for recognition. The aircraft was there. Light reflected off its surface. Japanese pilots looked directly at it, but their brains received insufficient contrast data to separate aircraft from background. The effect wasn't perfect. At certain sun angles, the contrast returned and the P-38 became visible. Early morning, late afternoon, when the sun was low and light came from horizontal angles, the aircraft appeared normally. But mid-morning through mid-afternoon, when the sun was high and light came from above, the P-38 dissolved into the sky. Japanese pilots had been following doctrine perfectly. 8-second scans, correct altitude, proper spacing, perfect visibility. They'd been looking exactly where they should have been looking. Their eyes had been receiving light reflected from the American fighter. But the contrast was too low. Their brains couldn't extract the signal from the background. They saw sky. The aircraft was part of that sky, indistinguishable. The phenomenon wasn't new. German Luftwaffe had discovered it in 1940. They painted some 109 fighters in light blue-gray for high-altitude reconnaissance missions. Results were mixed, worked sometimes, failed other times. They abandoned the experiment because consistency was impossible to predict. Atmospheric conditions varied. Sun angles changed. What worked over France at 25,000 feet failed over England at 20,000 feet. The Americans had refined it. They'd studied atmospheric optics. They'd measured sky color at specific altitudes in the Pacific Theater. They'd analyzed sun angle data for the Solomon Islands latitude. They'd calculated the exact paint mixture that would work in that specific geographic location, at that specific altitude band, during that specific time window each day. The P-38 pilot wasn't invisible. He was perfectly camouflaged for one very narrow set of conditions. And he was smart enough to fight only when those conditions existed. The aircraft itself was critical. Most fighters couldn't use this tactic. The P-40, P-51 Mustang, F-4F Wildcat all had their guns mounted in the wings. Wing-mounted guns created a problem called convergence. The guns were positioned 5 to 10 feet apart, pointing inward, harmonized to concentrate fire at a specific distance, usually 300 yards. At 300 yards, the bullet streams crossed and formed a devastating concentration of fire. A buzzsaw, anything that flew into it evaporated. But at 200 yards, the bullets hadn't converged yet. They passed on either side of the target. At 400 yards, they'd already crossed and spread apart. The pilot had to estimate range perfectly. Missed by 50 yards and the bullets went wide. This made camouflage tactics nearly impossible. To use camouflage effectively, the pilot needed to get close. Very close. Close enough that the target couldn't escape once the attack began. But wing-mounted guns couldn't hit reliably at close range unless the convergence distance matched the attack distance exactly. The pilot had to guess the range while approaching invisibly, position himself at exactly the convergence distance, and fire before the target maneuvered. One mistake in range estimation and the bullets missed. The target survived. The camouflage advantage disappeared because now the target knew an attacker was present. The P-38 Lightning didn't have this problem. The P-38 had a revolutionary design, twin engines mounted on separate booms, central nacelle for the pilot, and because the engines were out on the booms, the nose of the central nacelle was empty. Engineer Kelly Johnson packed the entire armament into that nose, 4.50 caliber machine guns and 120 cannon. All 5 weapons clustered so tightly that the barrels were nearly touching. All 5 weapons pointed straight ahead, parallel to each other. No convergence, no harmonization, no range guessing. The bullets flew in straight lines, staying together regardless of distance. At 100 yards, the spread was 6 inches. At 300 yards, still 6 inches. At 500 yards, 8 inches. The pilot aimed where the crosshairs pointed and the bullets went there. Precise, predictable, deadly. This meant the P-38 pilot could attack from any range. He could close to 200 yards, close enough that the target filled his windscreen, and fire with perfect confidence. All 5 weapons converged on a single point. The .50 caliber rounds shattered structure. The 20 cannon shells exploded internally. 2 seconds of fire delivered enough destructive power to destroy any single-engine fighter. The combination was devastating. High-altitude camouflage made the approach invisible. Nose-mounted guns made the attack lethal at close range. No convergence problems. No range estimation, just aim and fire. By the time the target detected the attack, the target was already dead. The specific pilot using this technique was Captain Richard Bong. Not yet famous in March 1944, that would come later. 40 confirmed kills by war's end. America's top ace, Medal of Honor recipient. But in March, he was just a quiet farm kid from Wisconsin who'd figured out something nobody else had. Bong had read the atmospheric optics research. He'd requested the experimental gray paint. He'd studied sun angle tables for the Solomons. He'd calculated the optimal patrol altitude 19500 to 20,500 feet, where his paint worked best. He'd planned his patrol times 10:00 a.m. to 2:00 p.m. when sun angle was high. He'd practiced the approach geometry until it was automatic. His tactic was methodical: patrol at 20,000 feet, scan for Japanese formations, position himself 2,000 yards behind and slightly above, descend gradually while approaching, use the P-38 speed 380 at full throttle to close the distance before the target could react, get within 300 yards, verify target in gunsight, close to 200 yards, fire, 2-second burst, target destroyed, climb back to 20,000 feet, resume patrol. The Japanese never saw him coming because they were looking for a dark silhouette against blue-gray sky. They were seeing blue-gray aircraft against blue-gray sky. Insufficient contrast, invisible approach. Even if they somehow detected him, they couldn't escape. The Zero was agile but slow in a dive. Top speed, 330. The P-38 was faster in every regime. Once Bong began his attack run, the Zero pilot had perhaps 8 seconds before weapons range. 8 seconds to detect a camouflaged aircraft, recognize it as a threat, process the geometry, and execute evasive maneuvers. Not enough time. Bong's kill rate was surgical: 1 attack, 1 kill. He didn't dogfight, didn't chase, didn't engage multiple targets. He killed 1 aircraft and left immediately. The surviving Japanese pilots never saw what killed their squadron mate. They reported no enemy contact. Intelligence analysts read no enemy contact and couldn't explain the loss. The tactic worked for 6 weeks, 23 kills, perfect record. 0 losses. Then someone made a mistake. April 7, 1944. Bong's squadron commander visited his aircraft during pre-flight inspection. He looked at the gray paint. Experimental, unauthorized at squadron level, applied before Bong's deployment but never officially documented, never approved through proper channels. The commander had read the kill reports: 23 victories, 0 losses. He'd also read the tactical doctrine manual. Army Air Forces Technical Order 711, Section 4, Paragraph 12. Fighter aircraft will maintain standard camouflage patterns as olive drab upper surfaces, neutral gray lower surfaces, no deviations without written authorization from Material Command. Bong's P-38 was painted entirely in experimental gray. Direct violation. The commander faced a choice: enforce regulations and repaint the aircraft to standard colors, or ignore the violation and let the killing continue. By the book or by the results. He ordered Bong to repaint the aircraft to standard colors. Bong, 3 days later, his P-38 wore regulation olive drab and neutral gray. He flew his next patrol on April 11th. Standard paint. Standard altitude. Standard tactics, except now he was visible. The camouflage advantage was gone. He encountered 4 Zeros at 19,000 feet. They saw him immediately. They maneuvered into defensive formation. Bong attacked anyway. The P-38's speed and firepower still gave him an advantage. He killed 1 Zero in the initial pass. The other 3 escaped. Bong returned to base. 1 kill. Not the perfect surgical strike he'd been executing for 6 weeks. A standard engagement. Messy, costly in fuel and ammunition. The intelligence reports changed immediately. Japanese pilots started seeing their attackers. They reported P-38 lightning in their combat reports. They described the twin booms, the distinctive silhouette, the devastating nose-mounted firepower. They could see it now. They could fight back. They still lost most engagements. The P-38 was simply a superior aircraft, but they weren't dying without knowing what killed them. Japanese losses decreased, not because the P-38 became less effective, but because Japanese pilots could now execute evasive maneuvers. If you can see the threat, you can dodge it. Maybe you still die, but not every time. Not with surgical certainty. Bong's kill rate dropped from 1 per sortie to 1 per 3 sorties. Still excellent by any standard. Still ace-level performance. But the advantage of invisibility was gone. 5th Air Force Headquarters received the data. They compared Bong's performance before and after the repaint. March statistics: 23 sorties, 23 kills, 0 losses. April statistics: 9 sorties, 3 kills, 0 losses. Same pilot, same aircraft type, different paint. Someone at headquarters did the math. The experimental gray paint had tripled kill efficiency, not through superior firepower or speed or maneuverability, through optical camouflage, through exploiting human visual system limitations, through physics. They reversed the paint order. Memo dated April 19, 1944. Selected P-38 aircraft operating in the South Pacific Theater are authorized to utilize experimental high-altitude camouflage paint patterns. Commanding officers will identify suitable pilots and aircraft for this tactical program. Carefully worded, selected aircraft, suitable pilots, not mandatory, not fleet-wide. Just permission for commanders to do what worked. Bong's P-38 was repainted gray on April 22nd. He flew on April 24th. Back to 20,000 feet, back to invisible approaches, back to surgical kills. The Japanese pilots who'd been seeing P-38s for 2 weeks suddenly stopped seeing them again. Confusion returned. The mystery they thought they'd solved, it's just P-38 lightnings, reopened. Why could they see some P-38s but not others? They never figured it out. The war ended with Japanese intelligence still puzzled by the intermittent invisibility of certain American fighters. The doctrine violation was explicit. Army Air Force's Technical Order 711 said olive drab and neutral gray. Period. No exceptions without material command authorization. Bong's gray paint had no such authorization. His squadron commander knew it. 5th Air Force headquarters knew it. Material Command eventually found out and opened an investigation. The investigation concluded in July 1944. Finding: violation confirmed. Recommendation: no disciplinary action. Reasoning: results justified deviation. Kill ratio improvement outweighed regulatory compliance. The recommendation included a note that would become doctrine. Visual camouflage at altitude provides tactical advantage exceeding standardization benefits. Future fighter designs should incorporate optical camouflage considerations during development phase. That note changed military aviation. Not immediately, not during World War II. But afterwards, when designers sat down to create jet fighters for the Cold War, they remembered. Visual detection remained primary threat identification method through the 1950s and 1960s. Radar existed, but visual confirmation was mandatory before engagement. If the enemy couldn't see you, you won. The F-86 Sabre, America's first swept-wing jet fighter, deployed to Korea in 1950 wearing experimental gray-blue paint on some aircraft. Air Force called it Air Superiority Gray. Same principle as Bong's paint. Match the sky. Reduce visual contrast. Delay detection. The F-4 Phantom II, the dominant fighter of the 1960s, used two-tone gray camouflage specifically calculated for high-altitude operations. Light gray underneath to blend with sky when viewed from below. Darker gray on top to blend with terrain when viewed from above. The paint schemes were tested in wind tunnels with calibrated lighting to measure contrast at various angles and distances. The F-15 Eagle, introduced in 1974, came in Air Superiority Blue A gray-blue shade derived directly from World War II atmospheric optics research. Same research Bong had used. 30 years later. Still relevant. Modern stealth aircraft, F-22 Raptor, F-35 Lightning II, use radar-absorbing materials and angular surfaces to reduce radar signature, but they also use specific paint formulations to reduce visual signature. The paint isn't just coating. It's carefully engineered to minimize contrast at operational altitudes. Physics hasn't changed. Human eyes still detect contrast. Reduce contrast, reduce detection. The P-38's nose-mounted guns had similar legacy. Every jet fighter designed after World War II abandoned wing-mounted guns. F, nose-mounted, F-4, nose-mounted, F-15, nose-mounted, F-16, nose-mounted. The convergence problem was solved permanently by putting weapons on the aircraft's centerline. Kelly Johnson's controversial design, became standard practice. Richard Bong ended the war with 40 confirmed kills. America's top ace. He never flew combat again after August 1944. 5th Air Force pulled him from duty, too valuable to risk. He returned to the United States, toured war bond rallies, posed for recruitment posters. The farm kid from Wisconsin became a national hero. He died 7 months later, August 6, 1945, test pilot assignment, P-38 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, engine failure on takeoff, too low to bail out, crashed on the runway at Burbank. He was 24 years old. His tactics survived him, the gray paint, the high-altitude patrol pattern. The invisible approach. 5th Air Force trained 23 other pilots in the method. They collectively scored 147 additional kills using Bong's technique before the war ended. The Japanese never developed an effective counter. They tried different patrol altitudes, didn't work. They tried different times of day, partially effective, but limited operational flexibility. They tried different scan patterns, made no difference when the contrast wasn't there. The answer to the mystery: how did one fighter kill opponents who never saw him? Physics defeated doctrine at 20,000 feet. Human eyes need contrast to see. Reduce contrast to zero, achieve invisibility. Add nose-mounted guns that hit precisely at any range, achieve lethality. Combine both, achieve dominance. Doctrine changed because one pilot read atmospheric optics research and requested experimental paint. Because one engineer put guns in the nose instead of the wings. Because one squadron commander looked at results and decided regulations could wait. The lesson remained. Innovation often violates existing rules because existing rules were written for existing problems. New problems require new solutions. New solutions require permission to break old patterns. The military organizations that learn this survive. Those that don't. 23 Japanese pilots died in 6 weeks because their doctrine said scan every 8 seconds, and their eyes couldn't detect what they were scanning for. Their doctrine was perfect for visual combat against visible opponents, useless against invisible ones. Doctrine eventually caught up, took 30 years. By Vietnam, every American fighter pilot knew. Altitude determines camouflage effectiveness, sun angle determines visibility window, nose-mounted weapons eliminate convergence problems. Standard knowledge, taught in flight school. Started with one pilot in gray paint over the Solomons. We tell this story because 23 men died while following perfect doctrine against an opponent who'd made doctrine obsolete. We tell it because the tools of victory were forged by violating the regulations designed to ensure uniformity. We tell it because contrast matters, and sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one you're looking directly at but cannot see.